think I want to maybe to discuss together, and then maybe if people have some questions. At least in our university, as far as I know, students who are studying international relations, how do you translate מדעי המדינה?
Political science.
Political science. There is a program in conflict research.
Conflict resolution.
Conflict resolution, okay, that's a master's program.
Yeah.
As far as I know, they're not supposed to do any spatial, any GIS, they have no obligatory courses in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also IR department chair, so I can tell you exactly. Yeah, that's a wonderful question and comment. We should have had. We had once a person who taught political geography to IR students. There were specific problems with the course. It didn't go so well. GIS, all kinds of technological tools might sound to IR student as related to, I don't know, mathematical, statistical aspects, and some of them might be deterred. On the other hand, you're right, it's a great opportunity to collaborate and to do something together with the geography department. I think it should really be done.
Okay, so I wanted to hear from our visitors. Okay, well, you don't know in which department you are, because different universities are organized differently. But if you can just say in which department or school or faculty you are, and whether in your school, faculty, students who are studying international relations or conflict, are they expected to study any spatial stuff? Or if they study such courses, can it count to the degree? Because if they will do such a course here, it will be just the choice. It won't be, maybe it will even be recognized. I don't know.
If we agree, it will be recognized.
But at the moment?
At the moment? Well, it's open to negotiations.
Okay, so I just would like to hear from you, and what do you think? What should be done?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm in a political science department, and so we do not offer regular courses in GIS and spatial methods, right? So our department is very kind of quantitative, empirical, right? So that the question that you raised, are students deterred, is never a question. Our students are all fluent in like quant methods, and some of them even specialize in spatial questions, and they use spatial data. But then sometimes we bring in lecturers from abroad or to teach a block course, or we send our students to courses of that kind, right? A colleague of mine at Trondheim, Jan Ketil, he's teaching GIS with a particular focus on conflict, and that was or has been a very popular course. It has been held at Konstanz, but we also send our students there to take part in that course.
Are you teaching any spatial technology courses?
I taught R, Introduction to R, and one of the sessions out of 8 or 6 sessions, 8 sessions, is specializing in spatial methods and spatial data processing with R, which is R, as you probably know, is not a point and click, it's a scripted interface, right? So it's very powerful, right? But you shouldn't be afraid of computers and programs if you use it. It's no graphical interface, there's no mouse, and you don't click. For good reasons, many good reasons, right? That's how we do it.
Christine?
So I'm at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research, which is, the idea is that it's interdisciplinary. So political science is separate, although that's who we're closest to, relatively speaking. Our PhD students sometimes will take GIS courses, again with the same teachers as they're getting in Konstanz. Our undergrad and master's students don't take any specific GIS courses. That said, conflict studies as a field, and I think our department represents that, is interdisciplinary in the sense that we will have people working on social psychology that are in the field of economics, people using historical data, sometimes taking historical data and making it quantitative, sometimes using it in a more narrative sense. A little bit of anthropology, not as much. And so the opportunities for the ways in which they use data is very much driven by the theories that they want to address. And so for some of those, a geographic perspective is very relevant, and some of them, it's not. And so I think our students use geographically disaggregated data pretty frequently, but they rarely produce it or work with the geographic systems themselves. So within conflict studies, there are a lot of data sets that are already packaged, and that's the sort of perspective they work on, more than really understanding the underlying geographic data and ideas that drove the production of those data in the first place.
So if a student wants to do some spatial research, it's up to him or her to find a course to study it?
I would say that's true for all of our students, for all of their interests. So when it gets to time for them to be interested in sort of work on their master's thesis, for example, they're going to have to go out and learn whatever it is they need to know for their specialized area, whether it's archival work or geographic work or different types of statistical models than we've taught them. Or you know, they often go out, and about a third of our students go out and do field work themselves of various types. So yeah, they're on their own, but they always, it's not special for geography, they're kind of on their own across the interdisciplinary space.
No. Lena, you're a geographer in your background?
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, I have to.
Okay, about that.
Yeah, I'm a physical geographer and have studied ArcGIS. And currently I'm working at the Department of Planning, a group for geoinformatics, which is also the courses we have. But before that I was working at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Lund University, and we had a master's program in Middle Eastern Studies. And one of the courses was an environment, sustainability in the Middle East course, and in that course I had one session about GIS. And usually the students got really excited about it, even though they were coming usually from social science and humanities even, and many of them were not used to working with computers in that way. And I just had a really simple exercise for them, and it was much appreciated, and I think most gave them some ideas of how they could work in the future, even though they didn't have all the knowledge about it necessary, but piece of it, sample. But I think it's hard to put in a big GIS course in the master's program, because you need to do other things as well, and it takes quite some time to learn GIS.
Yeah.
In a way that you're comfortable working with it.
Okay. Irina? You're in a communications department?
No, I'm in a very weird university because we're very small. We didn't actually have any departments until about a year ago.
Okay.
And now we're split into 3 departments, which is computer science, digital design, and business IT. And I work across the 3 departments, so I sort of still do pretty much the same thing. So this is an IT university. We don't have pretty much anything that has to do with GIS or geography. We do have some courses that have to do with location data, but from much more of a computer science point of view. So it's much less concerned with mapping in the geographical sense, as it is concerned with location data and pretty much creating apps for that. It's an IT university. So yeah, but we just started, we're just running the second year of a brand new data science program. And so one of the interesting questions there is what kind of data to teach them to work with. And now that they're going into the second year, now there's a question of whether something other than just plain R and Python might be useful. So there's discussions of maybe adding GIS, maybe we're definitely adding network data, and so now there's discussions about that. But we don't really have a lot of expertise in GIS at ITU, so it's narrow.
Okay. David, well, you're not in political science, so would you like to add something to
Sure, yeah, well, so I'm in the School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering, and we have 4 departments in the program. So we have departments in computer science, informatics, information and library science, and engineering. And then there's also a data science program that cross-cuts all of those. I'm not aware of any courses that specifically involve spatial data, like as the topic. I know we have a class in our statistics department, which actually is also in our school, on spatial statistics, so we have a local expert on that. We of course have a geography department. We have a pretty, I believe, fairly well-known global and international studies program. We like to brag that they like to brag that they teach more languages than any other university, I think, in the world, or at least in the country. That doesn't really in any way add to you, but that's, yeah, I did my best.
Do any of the other people here want to ask any question?
Maybe just to add from our end, also I'm at the School of Biological Sciences, and we offer a master's program. It's called Conservation Science or Conservation Biology. In the past, it was mostly biology and ecology and that stuff. And now we are aware, sort of, the students need to know more beyond that. The spatial tools is a must. They will study spatial tools, etc. But also studying a bit more knowledge about economics, political sciences, things that are start approaching your areas. And so it's also from that side trying to get the students, but you need to find teachers to teach it, obviously. You don't want to pay external teachers because they cost you money. So you need to have your own people. So some of us work in some of these areas and introduce it into our talks, but obviously we're not international relations experts. So once again, it's the same sort of catch. We try to bring to them the whole variety, but we don't have the proper experts. So they hear in seminars and talks, but there's very little interactions at our University of Queensland in Australia with international relations. And as academics, we work with them occasionally, but the students have very little to do with anyone from peace and conflict studies. And students in conservation are probably the most open-minded students because they touch upon these things. Other students in biological sciences would not even know that there exists a department with that name. It's interesting how these silos are still quite hard to break because our teaching is so segregated by what faculty teach the courses and what they know. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other thoughts you want to share?
I was going to say that just from a perspective of, working with GIS for the past 30 years, let's say, I don't know that in an international relations department you would need an actual course in GIS, but I would find it hard to imagine that they don't, that they shouldn't have some kind of connection to spatial issues. I mean, you're dealing with geopolitics, you're dealing with communities, countries. You should have some understanding of mapping, of geography. So I don't know if a whole course would be necessary, but certainly some kind of a basic understanding of them. A lot of these issues do have political implications. So.
Carol?
There's a group that was not very much represented here, which is the users of spatial data. I mean, understandably, it's an academic conference, but I'd suggest that each of these departments would benefit from greater links with agencies that are either stupendously well endowed with spatial information. In Israel, that would, of course, be the Army. Or agencies which are enormously dependent on spatial information and may or may not have it. That in addition to preparing students for an academic career, some of them are going to go out in the real world.
The majority will go to the real world.
Thank you. And it would be helpful if they've had a bridging experience working within agencies that use spatial data, and in some cases the students will be bringing enlightenment to an agency that desperately needs spatial data, and in other cases, students will be absorbing techniques which are not even in an advanced campus like this one available.
Okay. Present yourself.
Hi, my name is Amit. I'm a postdoc here at the university. My work usually is lying at the intersection of cyber and IR. And coming from that, and maybe relating to the comment which is made right now, I just want to add that international relations, specifically maybe the subfield of, which is usually known as international security or security studies, is very much engaged today with technologies, specifically this kind of technology as well, but anything which is enabled by computers and high computation. I don't think one can actually teach security or international security without addressing that. That would not be preparing neither people that are going to be to pursue a professional career in that sense, reflecting what you just said here, nor academics of the field. And in that sense, I was listening. I was not here the entire day. I was here on the first part, and also came just now again. I missed a few of the lectures. I'm not sure if it was addressed or not. I would say that it is. I mean, a lot of you describe using those spatial tools as means to conduct research on different aspects, but also those tools are an object of policy. They're an object of security. They're an object to be manipulated in terms of security. I mean, going back to your lecture that I've heard before, there was Instagram, there was pictures taken by soldiers, are also reflecting the situation, but also the object of military security agencies trying to manipulate that information, using it, creating, the way how we perceive, the situation, security situation. Also, it is a main issue for regulation studies, and this is very much known. So, if you're looking for a link between the social sciences, in terms of international relations, political science, it's definitely there. To my own, humble opinion, being only postdoc, I would say that it should be a component of a needed course on the title of technology or current technology or advanced technology and international relations, but also can be dedicated specifically spatial, addressing the spatial issue, which is a must if you want to understand cyber or anything like that. So I was not going to say anything, but it seems like a very fitting conversations. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, thanks. Yes?
Unless someone else
What?
unless there are other opinions, but what I will be doing is incorporate the spatial data aspect into a new textbook, and kind of undergraduate and graduate textbook on data management, or practical data management for social scientists. And that's just importing very basic concepts from computer science. But the problem is that our data are getting more, and it's bigger, right? But people don't have the tools and the knowledge to handle them, right? So our students, for example, they're trained very well in statistical methodology, assuming that the data matrix is readily available. They can just run it through the regression machine, right? And that's just not true. You put it together, you clean it up, you recode data, you can store data in very good and very inefficient and bad ways, right? Which makes replication difficult. So the whole textbook is kind of mapping out a process for data management using some tools and thinking from computer science, structured data, all the way up to unstructured data. And one of the special topics in this book will be spatial data, right? What is spatial data? What does it mean to geotag an observation, right? Basically along the lines of what I did in my talk at the beginning, of course a little bit more in depth, but also looking at the tools that people need to process spatial data like really efficiently and to make it replicable, right? Because we should be striving for replication also at the data management stage, and not just at the analysis stage, which is what happens in the social science, right? So we submit our replication data, people can replicate the final stage of the analysis, the regression results, the graphs in the paper, but everything in the data generation process is not replicable, and that must change.
Moving backwards from that too, I think one of the themes of the day has been from a number of presentations about really understanding what these data are. So Lena is a good example, right, of wanting to go out and validate, right? What are these data? What are these measurements that are coming up in these large data sets? And I think that's important, particularly as people want to cross over disciplinary boundaries, that as they are taking data sets from other disciplines, it's often very hard to ascertain the lay of the field there and know whether these are good data or these are not good data. And so that certainly calls for more collaboration in that sense, so that you get that sort of rich hands-on knowledge of what it is actually that we're measuring.
So computer science courses.
Irina?
Well, I mean, I think the geodata is an interesting animal at this point because it's incredibly useful, it's incredibly evocative, and it has quite a lot of power in terms of providing some really interesting information. One of the things I teach my students right now is the fact that they don't want to touch geodata with a 10-foot pole if they're working for an organization. And the reason they can't do that is because it's not anonymizable. If it's personal data and it has location tagging with it, they can't make it anonymous. It's not possible. It's just not. And in organizations, that's problematic at this point. So there's an interesting legal component to working with data, and especially geotag data, because it brings with it really significant issues in terms of identification, in terms of tracking, in terms of how dangerous these data can be, both in terms of their collection and their use, which then certainly produces interesting questions. Geodata at the same time are interesting in how, at least in social media, are incredibly patchy they are. And we do quite a lot with cybersecurity, and there you have interesting problems because geodata are patchy, IP lookup tables are patchy, the ability to really localize where activity happens is patchy, and then you run straight into the fact that you have a difficult problem of jurisdiction when you're dealing with geodata, deciding where things fall. When we draw boundaries can break up buildings, but they also digitally actually create problems. So as I was talking about Bellingcat and all the digital forensics, the amount of time and manpower that it takes Bellingcat to do the kind of digital forensics that they do, much of it having to do with location data, is enormous. And that's in part because these data are so difficult to process. It's not just because they're geotagged badly, but it's because trying to get at some sort of ground truth and triangulate and figure out what's actually there and how to interpret it, it's not possible to do it automatically. There are no algorithms that can do that for you. These things have to be done by hand with people that know the location, that know the area, that know the context deeply. And there's an interesting disconnect here between sort of the big data and the enormous amounts of data that we're getting, the patchiness of that data, the coverage of it that is sort of, some of it's very, very thick and some of it's very, very thin, and then additional patchiness of geodata on top of that becomes really sort of an issue.
Okay, so thanks. So I think some of the things that we now said might lead the way to write, we can discuss this over dinner, some review paper or outlook paper of what are the challenges of using spatial data in public research. So we can discuss this over dinner. I want us...
what are the opportunities?
Yeah, opportunities, yeah. So I want us just to have the last slide to see the view from the amphitheater. So I'd like to thank you all for